In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where 1,000 alien civilizations bow before the might of advanced weaponry and technological supremacy, there exists one species that the galaxy has learned to fear above all others. Not for their plasma cannons or energy shields, not for their starships that can crack moons in half, but for something far more primitive and terrifying. Humans fight with their bare hands. When Princess Zarathul of the Nexarian Empire, undefeated in 700 ritual combats across 12 star systems, witnesses a lone human soldier face impossible odds, armed with nothing but flesh and bone, she discovers that some weapons cannot be forged in factories or powered by fusion cores. Some weapons are born in the human soul. This is the story of how one species' most ancient art became the galaxy's most feared weapon, and how a warrior princess learned that in the cold vacuum of space, sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is the warmth of human determination. The transport vessel Crimson Dawn shuddered as another plasma bolt struck its failing shields. Princess Zarathul of Nexar gripped the command chair with her four-fingered hands, her golden scales rippling with barely contained fury. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, their elongated faces glistening with perspiration despite the ship's climate controls. "Shield integrity at 12%, Your Highness," reported Navigation Officer Kethmore, his voice tight with barely concealed panic. "We cannot withstand another direct assault." Zarathul's serpentine tail lashed against the deck plating. At nearly 3 meters tall, she towered over her crew, her muscular frame encased in ceremonial combat armor that had never known defeat. 700 victories across 12 star systems had earned her the title of Combat Queen, yet here she sat, helpless as her diplomatic vessel limped through the outer rim of an unknown system. "How did those pirates penetrate our escort formation?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority of royal blood and warrior training. "Unknown, Princess." "They appeared from behind the asteroid field using some form of stealth technology. Our escort vessels were destroyed before they could raise their defensive screens." Communications Officer Veltar's tentacles moved rapidly across his console. "I'm detecting 3 pirate vessels closing on our position. Configuration suggests Mordak clan raiders." Zarathul hissed through her fangs. The Mordak were notorious throughout the outer colonies, slavers and murderers who showed no mercy to diplomatic missions. Her presence here was meant to establish trade relations with the primitive world of Terra, but the mission seemed doomed before it could begin. "What of the human delegation?" she asked, remembering the strange pale creatures who had boarded her vessel at the last station. They had insisted on accompanying her to their homeworld, claiming it would smooth negotiations. She had found them oddly fascinating, these bipedal beings, with their soft skin and peculiar custom of baring their teeth when pleased. "The humans are in guest quarters on Deck 7, Veltar replied. "Should we evacuate them to the escape pods?" Before Zarathul could respond, the ship lurched violently as something massive collided with the hull. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in red as alarms wailed throughout the ship. "They're boarding us," Kethmore announced unnecessarily. "Hull breach on decks 5 through 7. Zarathul rose from her command chair, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma sword at her side. "Seal the bridge. Prepare for siege protocol." She paused, considering their options. The Nexarian military was renowned throughout the galaxy for their combat prowess, but they were outnumbered and trapped. "How many warriors do we have aboard?" 43 Royal Guards, Your Highness, all trained in plasma weapons and energy combat. "And the humans?" Veltar consulted his readings. 5 members of their diplomatic staff. According to their files, none are listed as military personnel. Zarathul's scale brow furrowed. Humans were still largely unknown to the galactic community. First contact had occurred only months ago, and intelligence reports were sparse. They seemed physically weak compared to most spacefaring species, lacking natural armor, claws, or enhanced strength. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, though they had somehow achieved faster than light travel. The sound of plasma fire echoed through the ship's corridors, growing closer to the bridge. Zarathal could hear the distinctive roar of Mordak battle cries, mixed with the more familiar shouts of her guards. The pirates were making swift progress through the ship's defenses. "Your Highness," a new voice crackled through the communication system. It was Captain Mordoon of her personal guard. "The raiders have overwhelmed decks 5 and 6. We've established a defensive perimeter at deck 7, but we're taking heavy casualties. These Mordak are armed with military-grade weaponry, not the usual pirate equipment." "Hold your position, Captain. Reinforcements are coming." But even as she spoke the words, Zarathal knew they were false. There were no reinforcements. Escort vessels were debris floating in space, and the nearest Nexarian patrol was 3 star systems away. Another explosion rocked the ship, and the lights flickered ominously. The hull groaned under stress as atmosphere began venting from multiple breaches. At this rate, the Crimson Dawn would become a tomb long before rescue arrived. "Princess!" Veltar's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm receiving a communication from the human quarters. Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled to life, carrying a calm voice with the distinctive tonal patterns of human speech. "Princess Zarathul, this is Colonel Marcus Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. We're aware of your situation and request permission to assist in ship defense." Zarathul blinked in surprise. "Colonel Chen, I appreciate the offer, but your people lack combat training and equipment. Please remain in your quarters for your own safety." A sound came through the speakers that Zarathal had learned was human laughter, though she still found it disconcerting. "With respect, Princess, my files might list me as Diplomatic Corps, but that's a recent assignment. My background is somewhat different." Before she could respond, Captain Morton's voice cut through the communication. "Princess, the humans have left their quarters. They're moving toward the battle zone, but they're not carrying any weapons I can identify." Zarathul felt a chill of concern. Despite their odd appearance and primitive technology, she had grown to respect the human delegation during their journey. They possessed an unusual combination of intelligence and determination that intrigued her. The thought of them walking defenseless into a combat zone disturbed her more than she cared to admit. "Colonel Chen, return to your quarters immediately. This is not your fight. Actually, Princess, it became our fight the moment those pirates decided to threaten this ship." The human's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Don't worry about us. We'll handle this quietly." The communication cut off, leaving Zarathul staring at her crew in bewilderment. Handle it quietly? What could 5 unarmed humans possibly do against battle-hardened Mordak raiders? Her answer came sooner than expected. The sound of plasma fire from Deck 7 suddenly changed, becoming more sporadic and confused. The Mordak battle roars took on a different tone, shifting from triumph to alarm. "Captain Mordak, report!" Zarathal commanded. Static filled the speakers for several seconds before her guard captain's voice returned, filled with disbelief. "Princess, I'm not sure how to describe what I'm witnessing. The humans have engaged the raiders, but they're not using any weapons." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're fighting with their bare hands, Your Highness, and they're winning." Zara felt her scales ripple in confusion. Hand-to-hand combat was not unknown in the galaxy, but it was considered a primitive art, largely abandoned in favor of energy weapons and ranged combat. Most civilized species viewed close-quarters fighting as crude and ineffective. "That's impossible, Captain. The Mordak outweigh humans 3-1, and their natural armor. Princess, you need to see this for yourself. I've never witnessed combat like this before." Against the protests of her bridge crew, Zarathul made her way through the ship's corridors toward Deck 7. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached, but they were unlike any combat sounds she had ever heard. Instead of the clean hum of plasma weapons and the sharp crack of energy impacts, she heard thuds, grunts, and the unmistakable sound of flesh striking flesh. As she rounded the final corner, Zarathal stopped dead in her tracks. The corridor before her was filled with Mordak raiders, but none of them were standing. The massive, armor-plated pirates lay scattered across the deck, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. Their weapons lay abandoned beside them, many still fully charged and operational. In the center of the carnage stood Colonel Marcus Chen. The human was smaller than any of the fallen raiders, his pale skin marked with minor cuts and bruises. His simple diplomatic uniform was torn and stained, but he stood with perfect balance, his breathing steady despite the obvious exertion. As Zarathal watched, another Mordak warrior charged from a side corridor, raising a plasma rifle. What happened next defied everything Zara thought she knew about combat. Chen moved with fluid grace, his body seeming to flow around the Mordak's attack. His hand struck the raider's wrist with surgical precision, and the massive creature's grip on the weapon simply vanished. Before the rifle could hit the deck, Chen had stepped inside the alien's reach, his elbow connecting with a nerve cluster beneath the Mordak's armor plating. The raider, easily twice Chen's mass and armed with natural weapons that could tear through steel, collapsed like a felled tree. "Colonel Chen," Zarathal called out, her voice hoarse with amazement. The human turned toward her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never observed before during their diplomatic meetings. It was not cruelty or bloodlust, but rather a calm, focused intensity that spoke of absolute confidence in his abilities. "Princess," he said with a slight nod, as if they had encountered each other at a garden party rather than in the aftermath of a battle. "I apologize for the mess. We tried to be as gentle as possible, but some of these fellows were quite insistent." "Gentle?" Zarathul looked around at the dozen unconscious raiders. "You consider this gentle?" Chen's expression became slightly sheepish. "Well, they'll all wake up eventually. We could have killed them, but that seemed unnecessarily permanent." The implications of his words struck her like a physical blow. These humans had not fought desperately for their lives, barely managing to survive against superior opponents. They had exercised restraint, choosing to subdue rather than kill enemies who would have shown them no such mercy. "How?" she asked simply. Before Chen could answer, the sounds of renewed combat echoed from deeper within the ship. The colonel's expression hardened slightly, and he looked toward the source of the noise. "More raiders in the lower decks," he said, rolling his shoulders as if working out minor kinks. "If you'll excuse me, Princess, my colleagues could probably use some assistance." As he moved past her toward the continuing battle, Zarathul felt compelled to issue a warning. "Colonel, the remaining raiders will be the ship's senior officers. They'll be better armed and more dangerous than these foot soldiers." Chen paused and looked back at her with what she was beginning to recognize as a uniquely human expression of confidence, mixed with something that might have been amusement. "Princess," he said quietly, "you haven't seen dangerous yet." Zarathul followed Colonel Chen through the ship's corridors, her royal guards flanking her with weapons drawn. The human moved ahead of them with disturbing ease, his soft-soled shoes making no sound against the metal deck plating. For a creature lacking natural armor or obvious predatory features, he moved through the damaged vessel like a hunting beast in its natural environment. The princess found herself studying his form as they advanced. Chen was not particularly large by galactic standards, perhaps average height for his species at just under 2 meters. His build appeared lean rather than bulky, lacking the obvious muscle mass that characterized most warrior races. Yet something in the way he carried himself suggested coiled power, like a blade resting in its sheath. "Colonel," she whispered, as they approached another junction, "your diplomatic files made no mention of combat training." Chen glanced back at her, and she caught something that might have been amusement in his dark eyes. "Diplomatic files rarely tell the complete story, Princess." Earth has a long tradition of selecting diplomats who can handle themselves in difficult situations. We've found it reduces the number of unfortunate incidents. The sound of plasma fire intensified ahead of them, accompanied by the guttural war cries of Mordak raiders. Mixed with the alien voices, Zarathal could hear other sounds that she was beginning to associate with human combat. sharp exhalations of breath and the wet impact of flesh against armor. "Your colleagues are already engaged," she observed. "Jennifer and David are former special forces, like myself. Sarah was Olympic martial arts before joining the diplomatic corps, and Michael spent 8 years as a hand-to-hand combat instructor." Chen's voice remained conversational despite the violence ahead. "We're not typical diplomats, but then again, first contact missions aren't typical diplomatic assignments." They rounded a corner and emerged into one of the ship's main cargo bays, a vast space that had been converted into a makeshift battlefield. Mordak raiders had established defensive positions behind shipping containers and cargo pods, their plasma weapons creating a deadly crossfire pattern that should have made advancement impossible. Should have, but clearly had not. Zara-Thun watched in fascination as the other 4 humans moved through the combat zone like dancers performing an intricate choreography. They seemed to flow between the plasma bolts with impossible grace, never quite where the raiders expected them to be. The woman Chen had identified as Jennifer vaulted over a cargo container with fluid ease, landing silently behind 3 Mordak warriors. Her hands moved in quick, precise strikes, and all 3 aliens collapsed before they could turn to face her. The plasma rifles they had been firing moments before lay abandoned, their operators unconscious but breathing. On the opposite side of the bay, a tall human male was engaged with what appeared to be a Mordak commander, a creature nearly 4 meters tall with natural armor plating that could deflect small arms fire. The raider swung a massive war club in devastating arcs that would have pulverized any normal opponent, but the human simply was not there when the weapons arrived. Instead, he moved inside the alien's guard, his hands finding pressure points between armor plates with surgical precision. The massive commander's roar of fury became a grunt of confusion, then silence as he toppled backward like a felled tree. "Remarkable," breathed Captain Morden from beside Zarathul. "They fight like our ancient warrior legends describe, but with precision I've never witnessed." Chen nodded approvingly at his colleague's progress before focusing on a group of raiders who had taken position behind heavy cargo containers. These Mordak had learned from their comrades' defeats and were keeping their distance, using their weapons' range advantage to avoid close combat. "Smart," Chen murmured, almost to himself, but not smart enough. He reached into his torn diplomatic jacket and withdrew something that made Zarathul's scales ripple in confusion. It appeared to be nothing more than a small metal sphere, perhaps the size of a fruit from her homeworld. "What is that weapon?" she asked. "It's not a weapon," Chen replied, hefting the sphere experimentally. "It's a ball bearing from the ship's maintenance supplies, but in the right hands, any object becomes a tool." He drew back his arm and threw the sphere with casual ease. Zarathu tracked its flight path and immediately realized what Chen intended. The metal ball struck a power coupling above the raider's position, and the resulting electrical discharge created a shower of sparks that rained down on their defensive position. The Mordak scattered from their cover, and Chen's colleagues were among them before they could re-establish their formation. Within moments, the remaining raiders joined their unconscious comrades on the cargo bay floor. "Impressive," Zarathul admitted as the silence settled over the battlefield. "But I still don't understand how you accomplish these victories. Your species lacks natural weapons, armor, or enhanced physical capabilities." Chen walked over to one of the fallen raiders and knelt beside the massive form, checking for signs of serious injury. Satisfied that the alien would recover, he looked up at the princess with an expression she was learning to interpret as thoughtful. "Princess, may I ask about your own combat training?" The question surprised her. "I am Combat Queen of Nexar, undefeated in 700 ritual battles across 12-star systems. I have mastered 17 forms of plasma combat and 11 styles of energy blade techniques. All weapon-based combat? Of course. Personal combat without weapons is considered primitive and ineffective. Why would any civilized being choose to fight with bare hands when superior tools are available?" Chen rose gracefully to his feet, and Zarathul noticed again how balanced his movements appeared, as if every action flowed naturally into the next. On Earth, we have a different philosophy about combat. We believe that weapons are tools, but the most important weapon is the mind that guides them. He gestured toward his fallen opponents. These raiders relied entirely on their natural advantages, size, armor, and superior firepower. They assumed these advantages would guarantee victory, so they never developed the skills to fight without them. And humans did? Humans have no natural advantages, Princess. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most durable species on our planet, let alone in the galaxy. So we learned to think our way through problems instead of overpowering them. Jennifer approached their group. Her diplomatic uniform is torn and stained as Chen's, but her movements still fluid and controlled. Cargo bay secured, Marcus. No serious injuries among the raiders, though they'll have impressive headaches when they wake up. Thank you, Jen. Status on the others? David's checking the lower decks for any stragglers. Sarah and Michael are securing the bridge approach routes. She paused and looked toward Zaratul with what the princess was learning to recognize as curiosity. Your Highness seems interested in our methods. Zaratul found herself nodding before she fully considered the implications of her response. I have never witnessed combat like this. Your techniques appear to contradict everything I know about effective warfare. Would you like a demonstration? Chen asked, his tone casual but his eyes alert. A friendly sparring match, perhaps? I understand you're quite skilled with traditional weapons. The suggestion sent a thrill of anticipation through Zarathal's warrior instincts. Combat was not just her profession but her passion, and the opportunity to test herself against these unusual fighting techniques was almost irresistible. You would spar with me? I outweigh you significantly, and my natural armor provides considerable protection. Those are certainly factors to consider, Chen agreed with apparent unconcern. But if you're interested, I think it could be educational for both of us. Captain Mordaunt stepped forward, his expression alarmed. Princess, this is inappropriate. You cannot engage in combat with an alien diplomat. Why not? Zarathal asked, surprised by the intensity of her own curiosity. It would be a learning experience, not a formal challenge. She looked around the cargo bay, noting the unconscious raiders scattered across the deck. These humans had defeated experienced warriors without killing them, demonstrating both skill and restraint that impressed her more than she cared to admit. Very well, she decided, a brief demonstration with non-lethal intent. Chen smiled, an expression that Zarathal was beginning to find oddly appealing despite its alien nature. Excellent. Would you prefer to use your traditional weapons, or would you like to try hand-to-hand combat? The question sparked an internal debate. Her plasma sword and energy shield were extensions of herself, tools she had mastered through decades of training. With them, she was nearly invincible. Without them, she would be relying on her natural advantages against Chen's mysterious techniques. Pride and curiosity warred within her. The combat queen of Nexar did not back down from challenges, but her royal responsibilities demanded that she not take unnecessary risks. In the end, warrior instinct won. Hand to hand, she declared, removing her weapons and setting them aside. I am curious to experience these human fighting methods firsthand. Chen nodded approvingly and began removing his torn diplomatic jacket. Beneath it, he wore a simple undershirt that revealed lean muscles and several scars that spoke of previous conflicts. Ground rules, he said as he stretched his arms and shoulders. First contact to force a yield or demonstrate clear advantage. No permanent injury intended by either party. Agreed. Zaratul stepped into the improvised fighting area, her scaled hide rippling with anticipation. At nearly 3 meters tall and easily twice Chen's weight, she possessed every physical advantage. But as they began to circle each other, she noticed something that made her warrior instincts tingle with warning. Chen moved with the same fluid grace she had observed throughout the battle, but now she could see the calculation in his movements. Every step was placed with purpose, every gesture designed to maintain perfect balance and positioning. She had faced hundreds of opponents in ritual combat, warriors from dozens of species with various fighting styles and natural abilities, but none of them had moved with this particular combination of relaxation and readiness. "Whenever you're ready, Princess," Chen said quietly. Zarathal launched herself forward with the speed and power that had made her legendary across the star systems. Her charge should have ended the match in seconds, overwhelming Chen's smaller frame with superior mass and momentum. Instead, she found herself grasping empty air as the human simply was not where she expected him to be. Chen had moved aside at the last possible moment, his hands touching her extended arm, with what felt like gentle guidance. But the effect was far from gentle. Zarathal's charge continued past her intended target, her momentum carrying her beyond the fighting area before she could regain control. She spun to face him, her warrior's pride stung by the ease with which he had avoided her attack. "Impressive evasion, Colonel, but you cannot win by running away." "I'm not running away, Princess. I'm using your strength against itself." He gestured for her to attack again, and she obliged with a more controlled approach. This time, she led with a series of calculated strikes rather than a single overwhelming charge. Her four-fingered hands moved in patterns perfected through years of training, seeking to overwhelm Chen's defenses through superior reach and power. But once again, the human seemed to anticipate her every move. He slipped between her strikes like water flowing around stones, never quite where she expected him to be. Worse, each time her attacks missed their mark, she found herself slightly off balance, as if Chen's mere presence was somehow disrupting her natural fighting rhythm. "How are you doing this?" she demanded, pausing to reassess her approach. "You're fighting with perfect technique, Princess, but you're fighting the opponent you expect to face rather than the opponent who's actually here." Chen's voice remained calm and instructional, as if they were engaged in a lesson rather than combat. "Your attacks are designed to overwhelm resistance, but what happens when there is no resistance to overwhelm?" The philosophical nature of his response frustrated her, even as it intrigued her analytical mind. "Combat is about imposing your will on your opponent through superior force and technique. Is it?" Chen shifted his stance slightly, and Zarathul noticed that his positioning had changed subtly throughout their exchange. Where moments before she had felt like the aggressor, now she realized he had somehow maneuvered her into a position where her movement options were limited. Or is combat about achieving your objectives regardless of the methods used? Before she could fully process the implications of his words, Chen moved. For the first time since their sparring began, he took the initiative, stepping forward with blinding speed. Zarathal moved to block, her natural reflexes and training taking over. But Chen's attack came from an angle she had not anticipated, his hand striking a pressure point on her arm that she had not known existed. Her limb went numb, and her defensive posture collapsed. An instant later, she felt Chen's presence behind her, one arm looped gently around her throat in a hold that could have rendered her unconscious, but instead simply demonstrated his complete control of the situation. "Yield?" he asked softly, his voice close to her ear. For a moment, Zarathal considered continuing the fight. Her legs remained functional, and her natural armor would protect her from most attacks. But the realization struck her that Chen could have ended the match at any point he chose. His restraint was not a sign of weakness, but of absolute confidence in his abilities. "I yield," she said quietly, and immediately felt his grip release. She turned to face him, her mind racing with implications of what she had just experienced. In 700 victories, no opponent had ever dominated her so completely while appearing to exert so little effort. "How?" she asked again, but this time the question carried deeper meaning. Chen smiled, and she found herself responding to the expression with an answering curve of her own lips. "Would you like to learn?" 3 weeks after the pirate attack, Princess Zarathul stood in the training bay of her flagship Stellar Dominion, watching Colonel Chen demonstrate a concept that challenged everything she thought she knew about combat. The human moved through a series of exercises with fluid grace, his movements appearing almost meditative rather than martial. "The foundation of human combat arts is not strength or speed," Chen explained as he flowed from one position to another. It's understanding. Understanding your opponent, understanding yourself, and understanding the space between you. Zarathul attempted to mirror his movements, her larger frame struggling with the subtle balance requirements that seemed effortless for the human. Her natural instinct was to rely on power and aggression, but Chen's techniques demanded something entirely different. I don't understand, she admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. In every combat situation I've encountered, victory goes to the strongest, fastest, or best-armed opponent. Your method seemed to ignore these fundamental advantages. Chen paused his demonstration and turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. Princess, may I ask you something about your combat training? Of course. When you learned plasma sword techniques, did you focus on making the blade stronger? Or on learning to guide it more precisely? The question seemed obvious. Precision, naturally. The blade's power is fixed by its energy matrix, but skill determines where that power is applied. Exactly. Chen nodded approvingly. Now, what if I told you that your entire body could become as precise an instrument as any weapon? The concept intrigued her, though she struggled to grasp its practical applications. Show me. Chen gestured for her to attack him again, and she obliged with a carefully controlled strike. As before, he seemed to barely move, yet her attack somehow missed its target entirely. But this time, she paid closer attention to what actually happened. You didn't just avoid my strike, she realized. You redirected it. The energy you put into that attack didn't disappear, Chen confirmed. I simply guided it in a different direction. Your own strength carried you off balance. But how do you know where to guide it? How do you predict my movements? Chen's smile carried a hint of something that might have been satisfaction, because your body tells me what you're going to do before you do it. Every movement has preparation. Every technique has prerequisites. Once you learn to read these signs, combat becomes less about reaction and more about conversation. The philosophical language frustrated her even as it fascinated her. Conversation? You speak with your movements, princess. Your stance tells me your preferred range. Your breathing tells me your state of mind. Your eyes tell me where you intend to strike. Chen moved closer, his presence somehow both non-threatening and completely alert. Right now, your posture suggests you're considering a sweep with your tail, but your weight distribution indicates you don't fully commit to the idea. Zarathul felt her scales ripple in surprise. She had indeed been contemplating using her tail as a weapon, but the thought had been barely conscious. How could you possibly know that? Because humans learn to read body language as a survival skill. On Earth, the most dangerous predators weren't always the largest or strongest. Sometimes they were the most deceptive. Chen's expression grew serious. We learn to see through deception by understanding the truth that bodies tell. Over the following days, their training sessions became the highlight of Zarathul's routine. The human diplomatic mission to Nexar had been extended while both governments negotiated trade agreements, giving Chen time to work with her on these mysterious fighting techniques. But their sessions were becoming more than just combat training. Zarathul found herself fascinated by human philosophy and the stories Chen shared about his homeworld. On Earth, he told her during one rest period, we have a saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. It means that ideas and words can be more powerful than violence. Zarathul considered this while toweling perspiration from her scaled hide. But surely physical power must sometimes be necessary. You and your colleagues fought the raiders effectively. We did what was necessary to protect innocent lives, Chen agreed. But notice that we chose to subdue rather than kill. Every one of those raiders will wake up and have the opportunity to make different choices with their lives. Mercy is a luxury only the strong can afford, Zarathul observed, quoting an old Nexarian military maxim. Is it? Chen looked at her with the intense focus she had come to associate with his deeper philosophical points. Or is mercy a choice that defines what strength really means? The question haunted her long after their session ended. In her culture, strength was measured by one's ability to defeat opponents, to impose one's will through superior force. But Chen's approach suggested that true strength might be the ability to choose not to use that force. She discussed the concept with her military advisors, but found little support for such alien philosophies. "These humans are clearly effective warriors," admitted General Korthax, her chief strategic advisor, "but their methods are unnecessarily complex. Why spend years learning to read an opponent's intentions when a plasma bolt ends the fight immediately?" Because Zarathul found herself arguing, "Understanding your opponent gives you options beyond simply destroying them." The general's expression suggested he found this reasoning incomprehensible. What other option matters in combat besides victory? It was a fair question, and one that Zarathul struggled to answer within the framework of traditional military thinking. But her training sessions with Chen were beginning to suggest that the framework itself might be flawed. During their next session, she broached the subject directly. "Colonel, your fighting methods are impressive, but they seem impractical for large-scale military applications. How does hand-to-hand combat translate to fleet engagements or planetary warfare?" Chen paused his demonstration and she saw something shift in his expression. "Princess, would you like to see something that might change your perspective on human military capabilities?" His tone carried a weight that made her warrior instincts suddenly alert. "What do you mean? I've been authorized to share some classified information with you, given the alliance our governments are negotiating." Chen activated a holographic display unit that had been installed in the training bay for their use. "What I'm about to show you might be disturbing." The display filled with tactical information that made Zarathul's blood run cold. Fleet movements, casualty reports, and strategic analyses painted a picture of conflict on a scale she had difficulty comprehending. "This is from our recent war with the Kronek Empire," Chen explained quietly. "They invaded our space with technological superiority in every category. Better weapons, better shields, faster ships." Zarathul studied the data with growing amazement. The Kronek were known throughout the galaxy as a formidable military power, their fleet technology easily a century ahead of most species. "How did you possibly survive an assault of this magnitude?" "The same way we survived the pirate attack on your ship," Chen replied. "We used our weaknesses as strengths." The tactical displays shifted to show battle recordings that defied everything Zarathul understood about space combat. Outcome and outnumbered, engaged in maneuvers that seemed suicidal until their results became apparent. "You're using ramming tactics?" she asked incredulously. "Not ramming, boarding," Chen's voice carried grim satisfaction. "When you can't win a battle with superior firepower, you change the nature of the battle itself." The recordings showed human soldiers breaching enemy hulls and fighting their way through alien vessels with the same hand-to-hand techniques Chen had been teaching her. But scaled up to shipboard combat, the effect was devastating. Kronek warriors, accustomed to ranged energy combat, found themselves helpless against opponents who closed to melee range. "The Kronek never adapted to our tactics," Chen continued. "They kept trying to win the war they expected to fight, rather than the war we actually gave them. And the result? Total victory. The Kronek Empire surrendered unconditionally after we captured their emperor's flagship." Chen met her gaze directly. "Casualties on our side were minimal. The Kronek lost relatively few ships, but decided that fighting a species that could take their vessels intact wasn't worth the risk." Zarathul stared at the tactical displays, her mind struggling to process the implications. "You're telling me that human hand-to-hand combat techniques can defeat advanced space fleets? I'm telling you that adaptability defeats specialization, Princess. The Kronek were specialists in space combat, masters of their particular style of warfare, but they became so focused on perfecting their methods that they couldn't respond when someone changed the rules. And humans change the rules. Humans adapt." Chen's expression grew serious. "It's what we do best, Princess. We take whatever situation we're given and find a way to make it work for us instead of against us." She thought about this revelation for several days, letting its implications percolate through her understanding of warfare and politics. The humans weren't just effective fighters. They were strategic thinkers who approached conflict from angles their opponents couldn't predict. "Colonel," she said during their next training session, "I've been considering what you told me about the Kronek War. I hoped you would find it illuminating. It raises questions about human intentions in this sector. Your species has proven capable of defeating technologically superior opponents through unconventional tactics. Should the Nexarian Empire be concerned about human expansion?" Chen paused his movements and looked at her with what she was learning to recognize as complete honesty. "Princess, every species in the galaxy should be concerned about every other species' intentions. That's why diplomacy exists." "That's not an answer, isn't it?" Chen resumed his exercise routine, but his attention remained focused on their conversation. "Humans could have continued expanding after defeating the Kronek. Instead, we chose to establish diplomatic relations with our neighbors. Because conquest would be too costly? Because conquest would be pointless." Chen's response surprised her with its firmness. "What would humans gain by conquering the Nexarian Empire? Your resources? We have more efficient ways to acquire materials. Your territory? Space is infinite. Your population as slaves? Slavery is economically inefficient compared to voluntary cooperation." Zaratul found herself wanting to believe him, but her military training demanded skepticism. Then why develop such effective military capabilities? Because the galaxy contains species like the Kronek and the Mordak pirates who believe that might makes right. Chen's expression grew cold. "Humans don't want to conquer anyone, Princess, but we also won't be conquered. And if someone were to threaten Earth, then they would discover that our defensive capabilities are far more sophisticated than our offensive ones." Chen's voice carried quiet certainty. "Humans are very good at making our enemies regret their choices." The conversation stayed with Zarathul through the following days as she observed the human delegation's interactions with her government. They negotiated with patience and flexibility, offering trade agreements that seemed genuinely beneficial to both sides. But underneath their diplomatic courtesy, she could sense the same quiet confidence that Chen displayed in combat. These humans were not supplicants seeking the protection of a superior civilization. They were equals who had chosen to approach the Nexarian Empire as partners rather than competitors or enemies. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. "General Korthak," she said during one of their regular strategy meetings, "I want you to run a theoretical scenario." "Of course, Princess." "What parameters?" "Assume a human fleet of moderate size attacks our home system using the tactics Colonel Chen described. How would we respond?" The general's expression showed his surprise at the unusual request, but he began working through the tactical problem on his command displays. Minutes passed as he ran various scenarios, and Zarathul watched his confidence slowly transform into concern. "Princess," he said finally, "our standard fleet tactics assume opponents will engage us at range using conventional weapons. If the humans could reach boarding range, yes, our casualties would be catastrophic. Our crew training focuses on operating shipboard systems, not repelling boarders. And if their hand-to-hand combat skills match what you've described," General Korthax let the sentence trail off, but his meaning was clear. The Nexarian Empire's military supremacy was based on assumptions that humans had already proven false. "Recommendations?" Zarathul asked. "We need to develop new defensive protocols immediately. Cross-training for all crew members in close-quarters combat, modified ship designs to prevent boarding actions, revised tactical doctrines." The general paused, his expression troubled. "Princess, implementing these changes will require acknowledging that our current military strategies have fundamental flaws." "Then we acknowledge it." Zaratul's decision surprised her with its swiftness. "Schedule meetings with Colonel Chen and his colleagues. If we're going to be allies with humanity, we need to understand how they think about warfare." But even as she made the decision, Zarathul knew that her interest in human military techniques was only part of her motivation. There was something about Chen himself that fascinated her, something beyond his combat skills or tactical knowledge. She found herself looking forward to their training sessions not just as learning opportunities, but as chances to spend time with a being who challenged her assumptions about strength, honor, and what it meant to be a warrior. The realization troubled her more than she cared to admit. The emergency alert reached Princess Zarathul while she was reviewing trade agreements in her private study aboard the Stellar Dominion. The harsh tones of the combat alarm sent her scaled hide rippling with anticipation as she rushed to the bridge, her ceremonial robes flowing behind her. "Report!" she commanded as she took her position in the command chair. Captain Morden turned from his station, his expression grim. "Princess, we're receiving a distress signal from the research station at Kepler 442. They report being under attack by unknown hostiles." Zara Thal felt her warrior instincts sharpen. Kepler 442 was a joint Nixarian human research facility, one of the first collaborative projects resulting from their new alliance. An attack on the station would be an act of war against both species. Distance to target: 4 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity, Your Highness. Set course immediately. What other vessels are in range to provide assistance? The human cruiser Determination was conducting patrol operations in that sector. They should reach the station approximately 30 minutes before us. Zara Thal nodded approvingly. She had met Captain Sarah Chen, Colonel Marcus Chen's sister, during the diplomatic negotiations. The woman possessed the same quiet competence as her brother, though her expertise lay in fleet operations rather than ground combat. Communications with Colonel Chen and the diplomatic team? The colonel requests permission to accompany the rescue mission, Princess. His exact words were, "My people are in danger." The simple statement sent a chill through Zarathul's warrior heart. She had learned enough about human nature to recognize the steely determination behind those words. Chen would not be dissuaded from protecting his people, regardless of the risks involved. Grant permission and have his team meet us in Shuttle Bay 2, full combat equipment. The journey to Kepler 442 seemed endless despite the Stellar Dominion's impressive speed. Zara Thal found herself pacing the bridge, her agitation growing with each passing hour. The research station housed over 300 scientists and support personnel, roughly half human and half Nexarian. An attack on such a facility violated every principle of civilized warfare. Princess Communications Officer Veltar called out, "We're receiving a transmission from Captain Chen aboard the Determination. Put her through." The bridge's main display filled with the image of a human woman who bore a strong resemblance to Marcus Chen. Captain Sarah Chen's expression was professional, but Zarathul could see the same controlled intensity in her eyes that she had learned to associate with humans under stress. "Princess Zarathul, we've reached the research station." The attackers appear to be Vorthan raiders, approximately 12 vessels of destroyer class or larger. Zara Thal's scales rippled in surprise. The Vorthans were a nomadic species known for their aggressive expansion and brutal tactics, but they typically avoided targets defended by major powers, preferring to prey on isolated colonies and merchant vessels. Captain Chen, the Determination is a single cruiser against 12 destroyers. Those odds are not favorable for engagement. A.T. Sarah Chen's expression carried the same confidence that Zarathul had come to expect from humans. "Princess, those odds assume we're planning to fight fair. Humans don't generally make that assumption." Before Zarathul could respond, her tactical officer interrupted with urgent news. "Princess, long-range sensors show the Determination is accelerating directly toward the Vorthan formation. They appear to be on a collision course with the lead vessel." "Captain Chen, what is your tactical plan?" "The same strategy we used against the Kronek, Princess. We're going to change the nature of the engagement." Sarah's smile held the same disturbing mixture of warmth and danger that Sarah Thal had learned to recognize in her brother. "Please stand by for a practical demonstration of human naval tactics." The transmission ended, leaving Zarathal staring at the tactical display in fascination and growing concern. A single human cruiser was charging directly into a formation that should have been able to destroy it with concentrated fire from extreme range. "Captain Morden, can we increase our speed?" "We're already at maximum sustainable velocity, Princess. Any faster and we risk damaging the hyperspace drive." Zarathul forced herself to remain calm as they watched the engagement unfold through long-range sensors. The Determination continued its seemingly suicidal charge directly toward the center of the Vorthan formation, plasma fire from the enemy vessels lighting up space around the human ship. But something was wrong with the engagement pattern. The Vorthan shots, which should have been finding their target easily at this range, seemed to be consistently missing their mark. The human cruiser wove through the incoming fire with maneuvers that defied conventional tactical doctrine. "How are they avoiding those shots?" Captain Mordoon asked in amazement. "The Vorthans are excellent gunners, and at this range, evasive maneuvers should be impossible." Zarathul studied the tactical display more carefully, remembering Chen's lessons about reading an opponent's intentions. "They're not trying to avoid every shot," she realized. "They're forcing the Vorthans to fire in specific patterns." Indeed, the Determination's course corrections seemed designed to provoke certain targeting responses from the enemy fleet. The human ship was essentially conducting a conversation through its movements, asking questions with its positioning, and forcing the Vorthans to answer with their weapons fire. "They're hurting the enemy ships," Zarathul breathed in amazement. "Captain Chen is using her own vessel as bait to manipulate the entire formation." The Vorthan commanders, focused on destroying the audacious human cruiser, had unconsciously adjusted their fleet positioning to optimize their firing solutions. In doing so, they had clustered their vessels closer together and oriented them in a formation that maximized their offensive firepower while minimizing their defensive mobility. Exactly what the human captain had apparently intended. "Princess," the tactical officer announced with disbelief. "The Determination has just launched its entire complement of boarding shuttles. They're heading directly for the Vorthan vessels." Zarathul felt her warrior's heart race as she realized what Captain Chen intended. The human cruiser's charge had not been an attack run. It had been a delivery system. By forcing the Vorthan fleet into a tight defensive formation, she had brought multiple enemy vessels within boarding range simultaneously. The next several minutes provided Zarathul with her first opportunity to observe human naval tactics in real-time combat. The Determination continued its evasive maneuvers, but now its purpose was not to avoid destruction, but to provide cover for the boarding shuttles racing toward their targets. "We're receiving combat reports from the Vorthan vessels," Veltar announced, his voice filled with amazement. "Multiple ships are reporting internal fighting. Their crews are engaged in hand-to-hand combat with human boarding parties." Zarathul watched the tactical display with growing admiration for human strategic thinking. Captain Chen had not attempted to fight 12 destroyers in conventional ship-to-ship combat, where the odds would have been hopeless. Instead, she had transformed the engagement into 12 simultaneous boarding actions, where human close-quarters combat advantages could be maximized. "Princess, we're receiving surrender signals from 6 Vorthan vessels. The remaining ships are attempting to disengage, but their crews appear to be fighting for control of their own bridges." Within 30 minutes of the engagement beginning, the Determination had achieved what should have been impossible. A single human cruiser had defeated a Vorthan raiding fleet without suffering significant casualties, and had done so primarily through the application of hand-to-hand combat techniques in a space battle. "Most impressive," General Korthax admitted from his position at the tactical station. "I am beginning to understand why the humans were able to defeat the Kronek Empire. By the time the Stellar Dominion arrived at Kepler 442, the immediate crisis had passed. The research station was secure, the Vorthan raiders were either captured or in retreat, and Captain Chen was coordinating rescue operations for the station personnel who had been taken hostage." But as Zarathul reviewed the engagement reports, she realized that something significant had changed in her understanding of the human alliance. These were not primitive beings who had stumbled upon space travel through luck or outside assistance. They were a species that approached every problem with the same analytical precision that Chen had demonstrated in their combat training. "Colonel Chen," she said when the human diplomatic team joined her on the bridge, "your sister's tactics were remarkable, but I'm curious about something." "What's that, Princess?" The boarding shuttles were launched before the Vorthans had adjusted their formation. Captain Chen somehow knew they would respond exactly as they did. Zarathul studied Chen's expression, looking for the tells he had taught her to recognize. How? Chen's smile carried the same mixture of pride and satisfaction that she had observed when he spoke of his homeworld. Sarah spent 3 years studying Vorthan combat records and cultural patterns before accepting her current assignment. She knew how they would respond because she understood how they think. You mean human military commanders study their potential opponents' psychology as well as their tactics? Princess, human commanders study everything about their potential opponents. Time and sign channels, psychology, culture, history, technology, even their art and literature. Chen's expression grew serious. We learned long ago that defeating an enemy requires understanding them better than they understand themselves. The implications sent a chill through Zarata's warrior instincts. If humans applied this level of analytical preparation to all their potential conflicts, then every species in the galaxy was potentially vulnerable to tactics they had never considered. Have you studied the Nixarian Empire in such detail? She asked quietly. Chen met her gaze directly, and she saw the honesty that had become one of his most appealing characteristics. Yes, Princess, we have. And your conclusions? That the Nixarian Empire would be a formidable enemy and a valuable ally. Chen paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. And that Princess Zarathul is exactly the kind of leader we hope to work with in building a better galaxy. The compliment pleased her more than she cared to admit, but her military responsibilities demanded that she pursue the conversation's strategic implications. Colonel, I need to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll give me a direct answer. Of course. Could human forces defeat the Nixarian Empire in open warfare? Chen was quiet for several moments, and Zarathul could see him weighing his response. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. Princess, humans could defeat any military force in this galaxy, given sufficient preparation and motivation. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The question is, why we would want to. And the answer? We wouldn't. Military victory is only meaningful if it achieves political objectives that improve the situation for everyone involved. Chen gestured toward the tactical displays still showing the aftermath of the Vorthan engagement. Today, human military capabilities were used to protect Nixarian citizens alongside our own people. That's the kind of victory that makes everyone stronger. Zarathul found herself nodding, though part of her warrior's mind remained troubled by the conversation. The humans possessed military capabilities that could theoretically threaten any civilization in known space, but they claimed to prefer cooperation over conquest. The question that haunted her was whether this preference would remain constant if human interests were seriously threatened. Colonel, there's something else I need to discuss with you. Something personal. Chen's expression became more alert, though his posture remained relaxed. I'm listening. Our training sessions have become more than just combat instruction. I find myself looking forward to our conversations, to your perspectives on warfare and philosophy. Zarathul paused, surprised by her own honesty. I believe I've developed feelings for you that go beyond professional respect. The admission hung between them like a challenge, and Zarathul found herself holding her breath as she waited for Chen's response. Princess, he said finally, I'm honored by your trust in sharing those feelings. And if I'm being equally honest, I've come to care for you as more than just a diplomatic contact. But, Chen's smile was gentle but tinged with sadness, but we're representatives of our respective species during a critical period in interstellar relations. Personal relationships between us could complicate negotiations in ways that might harm both our peoples. Zarathul felt her scales ripple with a mixture of disappointment and respect. Chen's answer demonstrated the same strategic thinking that made him such an effective warrior and diplomat. He was choosing the greater good over personal desires, even when those desires were clearly mutual. You're right, of course, she admitted. Our responsibilities must come first. For now, Chen agreed. But perhaps when the political situation is more stable, when our species have had time to build trust and understanding, perhaps, Zarathul repeated. finding comfort in the possibility of a future where such complications might not matter. But even as they agreed to maintain professional boundaries, she could see in Chen's eyes the same longing she felt herself. The attraction between them was not just physical or romantic, but intellectual and spiritual. They understood each other in ways that transcended species differences. The question was whether that understanding would survive the tests that lay ahead. 6 months after the Vorthan incident, Princess Zarathul stood in the Grand Council chamber of the Nexarian Imperial Palace, facing the most important decision of her life. The ornate hall, with its crystalline walls that caught and reflected the light of 3 suns, was filled with the most powerful individuals in the Empire. Military commanders, planetary governors, trade ministers, and noble houses had all gathered for this historic moment. At the center of the chamber, Emperor Kethmal himself presided over the proceedings, his ancient form still commanding despite his advanced years. The formal ratification of the Human-Nexarian Alliance Treaty would reshape the political landscape of the entire sector. But Zarathul's attention was focused on the human delegation standing at attention near the ceremonial podium. Colonel Marcus Chen wore his formal diplomatic uniform, the simple elegance of human fashion contrasting sharply with the elaborate robes and armor of the Nexarian nobility. Yet his presence commanded the room with quiet authority that impressed even the most skeptical of her people. "Citizens of the Empire," Emperor Kethmal began, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "Today we formalize an alliance that will bring unprecedented prosperity and security to our worlds. The humans have proven themselves worthy partners through their actions at Kepler 442 and their honorable conduct in all our negotiations." Zarathul felt a surge of pride as the Emperor continued his speech. The past months had seen remarkable changes in Nexarian society, as human ideas about warfare, technology, and diplomacy had been integrated into their traditional systems. Combat training now included hand-to-hand techniques. Fleet tactics had been revised to account for boarding actions, and diplomatic protocols had been expanded to emphasize understanding over intimidation. But the changes went deeper than military doctrine. With technological development, and interspecies cooperation had sparked debates throughout Nexarian society. Not all the changes had been welcomed, and resistance to the alliance remained strong in certain quarters. However, the Emperor continued, his tone becoming more serious. "There are those who question whether such close ties with an alien species serve the Empire's best interests." As if summoned by his words, General Vaxthor stepped forward from the assembled nobles. The massive warrior, easily the largest Nexarian in the chamber, had been one of the most vocal opponents of the human alliance. His scarred hide and battle-worn armor spoke of countless victories in the Empire's expansion campaigns. "Your Majesty," General Vaxthor began, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime spent in military command. "While I respect the humans' tactical innovations, I question whether our empire should bind itself so closely to beings we barely understand." "Speak your concerns, General." "These humans claim to prefer cooperation over conquest, but they have demonstrated military capabilities that could threaten any civilization in known space. How can we be certain that their peaceful intentions will remain constant?" Vaxthor turned to address the assembled nobles directly. Furthermore, their strange philosophies about individual rights and democratic decision-making threaten the very foundation of imperial authority. Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd, and Zarathul felt her warrior instincts tense. She had expected opposition to the alliance, but Vaxthor's challenge carried political weight that could not be ignored. "The general raises valid concerns," Emperor Kethmal acknowledged. "Princess Zarathul, you have spent more time with the human delegation than anyone. How do you respond to these questions?" All eyes turned to her, and Zarathul felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Her answer would influence not just the immediate treaty ratification, but the future relationship between two species. "Your Majesty, honored nobles," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of 700 combat victories. "I have tested human capabilities firsthand. Both in battle and in peace, General Vaxthor is correct that they possess formidable military abilities, but he fails to understand what makes those abilities truly dangerous. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The human capacity for violence is not their greatest weapon. Their greatest weapon is their capacity for growth, for adaptation, for turning any situation to their advantage. They don't just fight enemies, they transform enemies into allies. Trust Teddy, General Vaxthor's expression showed his skepticism. Pretty words, Princess, but military strength ultimately determines political outcomes. If the humans decide our alliance no longer serves their interests, then they will negotiate a new arrangement that serves everyone's interests better, Zarathul interrupted. That is their nature, General. They solve problems rather than simply overpowering them. You speak as if you know them personally, Princess. Perhaps your judgment has been compromised by personal feelings. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Zarathul felt her scales ripple with anger. But before she could respond, Colonel Chen stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may address the General's concerns directly? Emperor Kethmal nodded his approval, and Chen turned to face Vaxthor with the same calm focus Zarathul had observed in their combat training. General, you question human intentions and capabilities. Both are fair concerns that deserve direct answers. Chen's voice carried easily through the chamber, his tone respectful but confident. You want to know if humans will remain peaceful allies or become conquering enemies. The answer depends entirely on how we are treated. Meaning that humans respond to the environment they encounter, General. Treat us as enemies and we will become formidable opponents. Treat us as partners and we will become invaluable allies. Chen's expression grew serious. But understand this. We will not be victims under any circumstances. General Vaxthor's hand moved instinctively toward his plasma sword. Are you threatening the Empire, human? I am explaining reality, General. Chen's response carried no aggression, but also no retreat. Humans don't make threats. We make promises. And I promise you that any species that attempts to subjugate humanity will regret that decision more than they can possibly imagine. The chamber fell silent as the implications of Chen's words sank in. This was not diplomatic bluster or political posturing. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with absolute certainty. However, Chen continued, his tone becoming warmer, species that choose cooperation will find that humans make excellent partners. We share technology, knowledge, and resources freely with our allies. We fight alongside them when they're threatened, and we help them solve problems that seemed impossible. General Vaxthor studied the human colonel with the calculating gaze of a professional warrior. And if the alliance fails, if our species find that our interests diverge too greatly for cooperation, then we negotiate new arrangements that work better for everyone involved. Chen replied, Humans are very good at finding solutions, General. It's what we do. But you would not submit to imperial authority if ordered? Chen's smile was polite, but utterly inflexible. General, humans don't submit to anyone's authority except our own freely given consent. That's not negotiable under any circumstances. The exchange had clarified the fundamental nature of the human alliance in ways that formal diplomatic language had not. These beings offered partnership, not vassalage. They would be allies or enemies, but never subjects. Emperor Kethmal seemed to understand this distinction. Colonel Chen, does humanity have territorial ambitions in this sector? None, Your Majesty. Space is infinite, and humans prefer to develop new worlds rather than conquer existing ones. We're more interested in what we can build together than in what we can take from each other. And your military capabilities? Will you share advanced technologies with your allies? Within reason, yes. But understand that human military doctrine focuses on adaptability rather than specific technologies. We're happy to teach our allies how we think about problems, but the solutions they develop will reflect their own nature and capabilities. Zarathul watched the Emperor consider Chen's responses, and she could see the moment when the old ruler made his decision. "General Vaxthor," Emperor Kethmal said formally, "your concerns are noted and respected, but I believe the benefits of this alliance outweigh the risks, provided we approach it with appropriate caution." The general's expression showed his disappointment, but he bowed in acceptance of imperial will. "As you command, your majesty," Princess Zaratul, the emperor continued, "you will serve as our primary liaison with the human delegation. Your insights into their nature and capabilities will be invaluable as we develop this relationship. I am honored by your trust, your majesty." But even as she accepted the formal appointment, Zarathul knew that her relationship with the humans, particularly with Chen, had already evolved far beyond professional necessity. The months of training, conversation, and shared danger had created bonds that transcended diplomatic protocol. The treaty ratification proceeded with formal ceremony, and the human delegation was granted full diplomatic status within the empire. But as the political proceedings continued, Zarathul found her attention drifting to Chen and the quiet confidence with which he had faced down General Vaxthor's challenges. Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded, and the various delegations began to disperse, Zaratul managed to find a private moment with Chen in one of the palace's quiet gardens. "That was well handled," she told him as they walked among the crystalline flowers that caught and reflected the afternoon light. "Vaxthor is not easily impressed, but you made your point clearly." Chen's smile carried a hint of weariness. Diplomacy is often about managing fears as much as promoting opportunities. The general was afraid that humans might become a threat to everything he values. "And will you?" The question was more personal than political, and Chen seemed to understand its deeper meaning. "Princess, humans will become whatever this galaxy forces us to become. If we're treated with respect and honesty, we'll respond in kind. If we're treated as enemies, you'll become the most dangerous enemies imaginable," Zarathul finished. "We'll become whatever we need to be to survive and protect what matters to us." Chen stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "But we'd much rather be friends." They stood in comfortable silence for several moments, both aware that their relationship had reached another turning point. The political alliance between their species was now formalized, but the personal connection between them remained undefined. "Marcus," Zarathul said quietly, using his personal name for the first time, "the treaty changes things between our peoples, but what about between us?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "What do you want it to mean, Zara?" The use of her informal name sent a thrill through her warrior's heart. "I want it to mean that we can explore what we've found together without worrying about political complications." "The political complications haven't disappeared," Chen pointed out gently. "If anything, they've become more complex, but they're also more manageable," Zarathul replied. "We're no longer representatives of species feeling their way toward an uncertain future. We're partners in an established alliance." Chen considered this for a moment, and she could see the same analytical process she had observed in their combat training. He was evaluating possibilities, considering consequences, and looking for solutions that would serve everyone's interests. "There's something you should know," he said finally. "My assignment here wasn't originally intended to be permanent." Zarathul felt a chill of concern. "You're leaving?" "That was the original plan. But the Terran government has offered to make this a permanent posting if I'm willing to accept it." Chen's expression grew serious. "The question is whether that would be good for the Alliance, and whether it would be good for us." "And your answer?" "My answer depends on yours, Zara. If you think we can build something meaningful together, then I want to try. But if you think our personal relationship would compromise our professional effectiveness," Zarathul silenced him by placing one of her four-fingered hands gently against his cheek. "Marcus, I've learned many things from you about combat, strategy, and human nature, but the most important thing you've taught me is that the greatest victories aren't won through strength alone. What are they won through? Understanding, trust, the willingness to choose cooperation over domination." She smiled, allowing her natural affection to show in her expression. "I think those principles apply to personal relationships as well as political alliances." Chen's answering smile transformed his entire face, and Zarathul realized that she was seeing him without the careful diplomatic mask he usually wore in public. "In that case, Princess, I'd like to formally request permission to court you according to both human and Nexarian customs." The formal language made her laugh, a sound that echoed pleasantly through the crystal garden. "Permission granted, Colonel. Though I should warn you that Nexarian courtship customs can be quite complex." "I look forward to learning about them," Chen replied. Humans are very good at adapting to new situations. As they walked together through the palace gardens, Zarathul reflected on the extraordinary changes the past months had brought to her life. She had begun this journey as combat queen of Nexar, undefeated in 700 ritual battles and secure in her understanding of warfare and honor. Now she found herself in love with an alien warrior whose people had redefined everything she thought she knew about strength and victory. The humans had shown her that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a plasma sword or energy cannon, but the willingness to understand and adapt to whatever challenges the galaxy might offer. And as she looked toward the future, toward the alliance between their species, and the relationship between them personally, Zarathul knew that the greatest adventures were just beginning. The combat queen of Nexar had finally met her match, not in an opponent to be defeated, but in a partner worthy of her respect and love. And in finding that partnership, both their peoples had discovered something more valuable than military victory. They had found the foundation for a future where strength served wisdom and wisdom served peace. In the end, the princess who had witnessed human hand-to-hand combat had learned that the most important battle was not the one fought with weapons, but the one fought for understanding between hearts that had chosen to trust each other across the vast darkness of space. The Princess Combat Queen witnessed his hand-to-hand combat HFY stories. Best HFY Adventures.